Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. I'm out here on the dock because I found this in one of my dead lure boxes. And this lure is one of the very first I ever made. It was actually meant to look like a finger mullet. And the desire to have a lure like this is what kind of got me into lure making. Because I thought if I could make a lure that looked like a mullet and stayed out of the grass and I could run shallow across some oyster bars, man, I could catch some fish. Well, I never really liked the way this lure acted, so let me show you what it looks like in the water. The lure never really had much swimming action. The only action it really had was a little bit of wiggle that dive lip gave it. And that was put there because of that. And even when I fished it with a jerk movement like this, it really didn't inspire me. Well, I never really liked the result on this lure, but for this video we're going to finish what I started all that time ago, and we're going to make a swim bait that looks like a mullet. So let's go to the shop. So I guess it's time to take this idea and make it real. Let's draw something on the dry erase board. Alright, that's going to have to be close enough. So we're going to stick with the three-piece design. And I want to cut this lure just behind where that fin is probably going to go, and then just in front of where this break in the body will be. So the total length will be right at 5 inches, which is about 12.5 centimeters. And I want to make it about 1.25 inches.
1.25 inches is equal to 3.175 centimeters.
Which is about 3.2 centimeters. Instead of wood, I'm going to use some resin. I'm going to cast some 2-part resin in a small mold that is going to be about 3/4 inches wide, and then those dimensions. So I sketched what I thought would be an appropriate lure, and then I took it over to the printer and I started to sort of scale it down. And then I scaled it up a little bit, and I played around with the scale. So this turned out to be the sort of the Goldilocks model. It has those dimensions. So I've decided on this template, and I'm going to be putting it on the surface of this block of resin. And this is resin that I just poured from a brand new shipment of, this is polyurethane casting resin from Specialty Resins. And I've had kind of mixed luck with these guys. The good thing is that they're relatively inexpensive. When I say mixed luck, I mean I've had some issues with being able to actually put a good finish on my lures with this stuff, but lately it's been working pretty well. So let's go ahead and demold this block of resin. Alright, now I sprayed this with some demolding spray, so it should come apart real easy. I put a little block of old resin to make it that size, but man, it came right out. So this one might be stuck on there kind of. Probably going to have to use a saw to take that off. I always do a trial piece that I poured in a little graduated cup, and I do this so that I can figure out the density. This comes in really handy. Now I know exactly what the density is of my 10% mix. So I'm going to go ahead and take my template and I'm going to stick it on here so I can start cutting the general shape. I'm not going to worry about that piece I have stuck to the end, because that'll end up coming off just kind of naturally as I cut it up. Okay, so I've just taken some scissors to it and taken off the template, and I'm going to put some of this Elmer's tape runner, and this is kind of like a real thin double-sided tape that's real easy to apply. All right, there it is. And now I'm just going to take it to the bandsaw, cut out the general shape, and we'll worry about details later. All right, so let's get cutting here. Still got chunks of coconut on here from the last lure. All right, now I can see, I think. Alright, that's close enough. The rest is going to be just a bunch of handwork. So one of the tricky elements of getting a lure cut out is getting the shape of the plan view, the view from above the lure. Yeah, and you can sketch out sort of a half body model, and that usually works best. So you can just put half and then the other half. The tricky part is not so much getting it drawn, is getting it to fit the final shape. After you cut this curve, this is longer than the original flat surface. So what I like to do is take a pencil, rock the lure up to the maximum point on one end, and then rock it all the way over to the maximum point on the other end. And now I've got the true length. Now with that full length, I can just draw a line, and that can represent the center line. And now it's just a matter of sketching in the shape that, you know, I think a mullet looks like. And in my mind, a mullet has a very broad and flat head, and then it tapers back to a pretty narrow body, and the body gets a little bit sort of round and bulbous around the belly. I'm trying to create a shape that tapers in from the head pretty quickly. This might be a little extreme. So after I've got all this jumble of little sketch lines, what I like to do is just sort of eyeball the best shape and then formalize that using some sort of like drafting assistance here. I'm going to go ahead and use some black pen here to make it more obvious what I consider the better line, and then I'll kind of round this head in. Now let me go ahead and cut this out. If you've carved lures before, you know that there's very little that's exact. So this is intended to be just a guideline so that I can get some level of symmetry between the two sides. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark the center line on this, and then I'll trace this, flip it over, and trace it again. So it occurred to me that you may not know the method I used to get the center line. So all I did was measure the full width, get the half width onto the set of calipers, and I'm just going to run across here and mark it, and it just scribes it in. Alright, that looks pretty good. That should make it a little easier for me to get this thing down to the shape I want it. At this stage, it looks very much like a rough wood carving. And since this is soft stuff, it's really easy to work and it's easy to overwork. And using this can really make a lot of headway, but you can also take off too much. So you've got to kind of take it easy, take your time, and leave as much as you're willing to for handwork. It's a pretty close approximation of what my intentions are. Still looks pretty rough, but I think I'm going to work with some hand sanding from here forward to make sure that I don't overdo it. I've already got some saw marks to fix up, so I'll come back to it when it's a little more refined. Alright, so it's actually nighttime now. It's like 9 o'clock at night. I've been messing around with this thing for hours. So I went ahead and penciled in the details. And I kind of like freehanding this stuff because my carving skills are, marginal anyway. The likelihood of me perfectly, precisely carving in exactly what I put in there is probably pretty low. So as long as it looks pretty good and pretty symmetric, I'm going with it. I'm going to be going on faith that my design is going to be a good one and turning it into a silicone mold so I can begin to cast these lures pretty quickly. Let's just keep working on this and see where we end up after some carving. So we got a rainy day today. And the rain is really going to probably hinder us from completing what I really wanted to do, was to get this lure to the point where I can water test it. And that means getting it cut and getting the hinges in there, at least temporary hook eyes and tie eye. Well, here's the shape, and I'm pretty happy with the general profile of it. I got the shape I wanted, and I've got the characteristics I wanted, the fat head, sort of rounded sides. And you can see I've already started to sketch in the details of the head. And if you sight down the length of the body, you can see there's some pretty nice symmetry there. You have to kind of ignore the discoloration here. What happened here is I had some saw marks that I just could not sand out without taking up too much material, so I had to fill in. Unfortunately, that took a couple iterations. But we got what we intended, discoloration or not. And you can see even upside down as you sight down the belly. And if you look at the side profile, you see that there's no flat spots. So I've got that nice round cross section that I really wanted on this thing. Alright, so let's look at what I've gotten done. So I've gotten these hinge plates cut out, and they're just simply cut from a thin piece of aluminum. This one's about 1/16 of an inch. So the arrangement of these plates are going to be in the body, and they'll be fixed in the front section or the forward section and hinged or pinned in the back section. So it'll be very much like this. It doesn't just sort of swing at the end of a pivot. It actually pivots somewhere inside the body. For this kind of arrangement, I really need enough room to have that hinge plate embedded in there and still have a slot on the back. So I think that arrangement should do it. But in the meantime, before I cut this, I'm going to begin carving these facial features because it's just easier to hang on to the whole lure and not just the front piece. Mullet have very sort of flat gill plates. Their gill plates run pretty far back on their head, and they lay really flat. There isn't a whole lot of texture there, and I'll put a photo up right here so you can see. So I'm going to just put a very light amount of carving on that gill, and then most of the carving will be on the mouth parts and just underneath the chin, where I get some contours to make it look a little more natural. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that. Beginning carving, what I like to do is then sort of sink these lines in a little more with sandpaper and just very slow handwork. Alright, so I think that's as much as I'm going to do. I'm pretty happy with it because I maintained the symmetry. They look the same on both sides, more or less. So I'm sticking with this. The little pectoral fin I'm going to put on in a different way. I'm not going to carve it in. So let's go ahead and cut this thing in 3 pieces. That's going to hurt. Alright, I'm going to be very slow and deliberate with these cuts because I don't want to have some kind of weird skewed cut. I'm going to get it marked, and then I'm going to adjust as I go, because like I said, I don't really want to blow it at this point. Okay, so what I've done while I was waiting for my camera battery to charge up was to cut the slots on the parts, and you can see, hopefully you can see there that they align pretty much ready to rock. I've also taken the plate, the hinge plate, and marked alignment lines so I know where they go on the inside of the lure, and then I've aligned them on the outside so that I can draw a small mark for the hole for the pin. Now for the pin, I'm gonna use this stuff. This is actually an 1/8 inch fiberglass rod, very smooth on the outside, so it should handle the friction of the aluminum. Now what I want to do is continue what I started on this one to round off this edges. So on the trailing piece, I want the edge to be rounded a little bit, so as it comes around it has a little more movement. And I'm doing that with some sandpaper glued into a chunk of PVC pipe, and the idea is to try to keep that symmetry and not take too much off on one side than the other. Alright, I'm going to clean up a little bit and start drilling these holes. So one of the things I'm doing is not going all the way through. I don't want a hole in the bottom, so I'm just getting down there far enough to embed the pin. Alright, let's do the rest. Alright, so I've got the holes drilled for the pins, and I'm going to set temporary eyes on these so we can water test this. Alright, now we need to talk about how much weight to put in these things. Alright, so I've done a bunch of calculations, and I'm not sure all of this is something you want to do. Most folks just are happy to hang the lure in water and keep putting stuff on it till it sinks, which is a great way to do it if you can do that. And in this case, it's going to be a little more difficult. I did all the calculations mostly because I want to be sure that I can get enough weight in these body parts because there's so much hardware. And here's the key to this. You have to know the density of your resin after it's been cast. So I already know that my resin is 0.576 grams per milliliter, and that just makes it so much easier. All I have to do is weigh the segment of the lure and then divide that weight by 5.76, and I get the volume of that segment of the lure body. 15.8 milliliters is equal to 15.8 grams of buoyant force upwards. So this needs, this segment with all the weight has to weigh 15.8 grams. So what I did is I did that calculation for all of it. I added up all the volumes, which gives me 40.2 milliliters. Then I added all the weight of the individual segments, and it's 23.37 grams, and then the difference is 16.83. That's how much weight needs to be added to the body. But I've got 7.1 grams of hardware, so my added weight to make it just start to sink is 9.73 grams. So that might seem a little convoluted, but actually it's the easiest, simplest way for me to plan ahead. And so the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to put 5 grams in the head, 4 grams in the midsection, and just 1 gram in the tail. So I've got the hinges in place. I don't have them pinned, but the ends that are fixed are in there and they're glued in. I just need to sand the excess. So now I'm going to cut more of these little fiberglass pins. Alright, so I've drilled the holes and placed the lead balls where I wanted them. I decided not to put any weight on the tail piece, so all the weight is in the front 2 pieces. And that should take care of business. Alright, bit of a mess, but we're getting there. So I've got all the weight in, I've got it sealed, and I'm gonna assemble this so we can go take it down to the water and test it to see how it swims. Now sometimes you gotta adjust the clearance a little bit, but I think I've got it right now. So the rain has stopped, so I think we'll be able to get down there and have a little bit of light, a little bit of sunlight, and hopefully you'll be able to see how this swims. All right, we're down here. It's a cloudy and kind of sketchy day. It's probably going to start raining again, but it's time to put this thing in the water and see what it does. Oh man, it swims beautiful. So it's swimming really nicely. It's a little bit too buoyant. I'd like it to sink just a little faster. I really like how fluid the motion is. It doesn't have that sort of clack clack kind of stopping on one side and the other that you do with a really restrictive joint. This joint lets it really flow. So yeah, I think a little more weight, and then I'm going to move that tie-eye up on the face a little bit because I think it's trying to pull the lure upwards. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you're enjoying this build. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click that thumbs up.